The Peloponnesian War would see Athens and Sparta involved in a drawn-out war between two behemoth powers that would influence and affect several other regions in the world, making a massive impact on the future of the region and on history as we know it. At stake was dominance within the region. It would eventually see the involvement of the large, expansive and powerful Persian Empire, which would be on the side of the Spartans. At the end of the conflicts in which Sparta would emerge victorious, we would see several aspects in the region change. One aspect was who was the dominant power at the end of the wars. In this case, Sparta emerged as the more dominant of the two powers after the wars, added to which was the economic boons that came with it. In this audio podcast we will explore the motivations, the events, the individuals, and the strategies of the wars as well as the economic consequences and other aspects as we dive into the conflicts. The years before the war would be marked by a growing Athens which was growing in its influence, but the period would also be noted for the tensions growing between Athens and the Peloponnesian states. The Delian League would play an important role in the events that would occur during the wars. The League had achieved a major role in driving the Persians away from the Aegean, and in liberating many states from Persian control. Created during 478 BC, it was a coalition of states with Athens as a dominant party. However, with time, disputes would arise within the League as exemplified by the rebellion of Thassus in 465 BC, and at other times, the League would be used for the individual interests of an Athens that increasingly was becoming more and more powerful in relation to its other Greek comrades. In addition, more funds were being utilized in ways that mostly benefited Athens and its interests. 480 BC would see the start of the Second Persian invasion of Greece, which ended in Persian defeat. A quick look at the Greco-Persian Wars. The Greco-Persian Wars would be fought between 499 and 449 BC between the Greek city-states and the Achaemenid Empire. It would end in Greek victory. It would also see the likes of Miltiades, Pericles, Leonidas I, Themistocles, Xerxes, Artemisia, and Darius the Great. It would end in the change of territory, with several states gaining their independence and being liberated. But what would start the conflicts, and what events would cause two of the world's behemoths to come to such a clash? In 547 BC, Cyrus the Great had overcome Ionia, a region for which Miletus would be the most important city. Cyrus the Great was the founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and in his reign he would go on to achieve several feats, including winning against the Median Empire. The empire he created would also continue to have presence in West and Central Asia. In Ionia, tyrants would be placed in charge on behalf of the Persian Empire, and these would create discontent within the population. One of these tyrants would play a role in the start of the Ionian rebellion that would lead to the beginning of the Greco-Persian Wars. The story goes like this. Aristagoras was the tyrant of Miletus. And at one point in time, with the backing of the Persians, he would move to invade the island of Naxos. But the attempt would be fated to fail, in part, due to a conflict that occurred between Aristagoras and a Persian admiral. Knowing that the end of his reign was near, Aristagoras would move to incite revolution against the Persians. An act that history would come to know him for. The Ionian Revolt had been born. Athens and Eretria would help the Ionians in this. In 498 BC, Sardis, a Persian regional capital, would be placed to siege by a Greek force, and eventually set aflame, accidentally or on purpose, in an act known as the Burning of Sardis. An act that would come to incite the Persian king Darius the Great. Fighting would therefore continue. In 492 BC the first Persian invasion would begin. Going back to the city-states of Athens and Eretria, this move was also a chance to punish the Athenians and Eretrians for their support for the Ionian revolt. All of Greece would be sent ambassadors from Darius who demanded surrender from them. Most of the states succeeded except Athens and Sparta. A massive war was coming. Another force, this time under Datis and Artaphernes, would be sent in 490 BC. And they would continue on to Naxos, an island that went on to be captured and burned. Datis was a noble and admiral. When the revolt in Ionia had occurred, Datis had been a commander in the Persian army, and he would play a part in some of the conflicts. He and Artaphernes would therefore be charged with this part of the campaign. Artaphernes was the younger of the pair, a nephew to Darius the Great. Their plan would be to use the eastern coast of Greece as an important region for part of their conflict. The Cycladic Islands would be added to the Persian Empire during this period, and Eretria would be besieged and would fall. After this, the force would arrive in Marathon. The setting for an upset which would define history for much of the following period, and put a pause on their plans. The Battle of Marathon. A battle between the Persian forces and the Greek forces would occur, the Athenians aided by Plataea. The Battle of Marathon would see the Athenian forces claim a victory that, with the events that had preceded it, seemed unlikely, but one that would dramatically change the course of events going forward. The Spartans would be observing a religious festival, so that when a messenger was dispatched to them seeking aid for the Athenians, they would not be able to send their aid to them, but they would be able to receive support from Plataea, a city-state found in Boeotia. Perhaps a great testament to the role of tactics on the battlefield, and a testament to the military and tactical ability of those present, the battle would be set before it started. To their advantage was the geography of the terrain. Playing to their advantage and preventing the Persians from mounting their full strength in one continuous force against the Athenians. They would attack with a fervor and purpose that, outnumbered, would be noted as near madness by the Persians who were facing them. The Athenians would eventually win the flanks, and work into the center, overwhelming the Persian force as they went, devastating the greater force until the Persians would be forced into a retreat. Soldiers would drive the beaten and humiliated Persians back to their ships, but they would still continue to lose men as they went. The numbers that the Persians lost would outnumber those the Athenians had lost by some way. Thus would end the Battle of Marathon. But it wasn't the end of Persia's attempts. An attack on Athens would be in their plans, and they would make a play for the city. But the Athenians would be aware and cognizant of this threat and would be prepared for it. The city would find itself sufficiently defended, repelling a Persian attack, and forcing them into a journey back. The Battle of Marathon within the context of the wars would be a significant point, for what would happen after and the message that the outcome sent. The great Persian army that had established a reputation for its might could be overcome. Victory was possible, and victory was within reach. There were weaknesses that could be used. But Darius wasn't one to stay and lick his wounds for long, and plans were already in the making for another attempt at the invasions. His vow on revenge had to be seen through, but it wasn't to be in his lifetime. He would die before seeing his aspirations fulfilled, and the throne would be passed on to his son, Xerxes I. After the death of Darius, Xerxes would take over, attending to Egyptian revolts, and handling them, before he continued where his father had started with the invasion of Greece. Plans had to be put in action, lessons learned from the first attempt had to be applied, and preparations for the wars had to be made. The Persian army would be drawn from several nations and regions. On the Greek side, the intervening time would be marked by several changes, including the death of Miltiades, who had played a significant role in the Battle of Marathon. But the Greeks wouldn't become completely unaware of the threat that the Persian nation still posed. Themistocles would see to it that their naval abilities would be increased. Though not without political resistance from several different quarters, and not without using some of his political knowledge and experience. Moving back to the wars, some of the Greek states would come together and meet in Corinth. A few things would change going forward. A confederation would emerge, and they would be able to bring together resources, and make decisions collectively, a feat that was made remarkable by the state of affairs between some of the Greek states, which had had a history of conflict, rivalries and clashes between them. In 491, when Darius had dispatched emissaries, seeking tokens of submission to his authority from the Greek states, Athens and Sparta would be in the minority as they refused. Sparta would throw the emissaries down a well, Athens would put the individuals to trial. About 10 years later, Xerxes decided to use Hellespont. His army would be able to make progress. One event that would gain some repute even far into the future would be the events that would occur at Thermopylae. Thermopylae was a narrow pass, renowned in part for its sulfur springs. Having failed to defend and repel the Persian forces' advances at the Vale of Tempe as they originally planned, the Greeks would move to use the intrinsic geography of Thermopylae to their advantage. And that is exactly what they did. Particularly Themistocles. Here is how the renowned battle that would see the greats like Leonidas of Sparta, and Leontiades of Thebes, would occur, and how around 7,000 would be able to face a force that was nearly 20 times larger. Themistocles, the man who had been able to convince other Athenians to build a navy, would convince the Greeks to take part in an attempt to stop the Persian advance. This would stall the Persians' further advance on the land, whilst a second part would block the Persians at sea at the Straits of Artemisium. The 7,000 Greeks would be led by the Spartan king Leonidas I. The Spartans would unfortunately be observing the festival of Carneia, added to which were the Olympic Games and the Olympic truce. Spartan law made military actions during the festival of Carneia unacceptable, and unthinkable. But an advance force of 300 would be sent. The Spartans were a force renowned and known for their abilities on the battlefield. It was how it ended up being that Leonidas and his hoplites would find themselves on the way to Thermopylae with soldiers that were able to join them from different cities. Camp was made at the middle gate, and a force of 1,000 were sent to guard a track in the mountains that was a vulnerability to the plan of the Greeks. Through it, their flank could be overcome and approached. The odds that the Greeks were facing at this point were immense, the numerical supremacy of the Persians was vast and defeat seemed all but certain, but the story that follows represents a David versus Goliath level of victory against an enemy that had greater resources at its disposal. Persian forces would be sent against the Greek phalanx. The Greek phalanx would see men arranged next to each other, bravely and sternly, with overlapping shields with interspaced spears stretching out from the wall. Wave after wave was sent, wave after wave would fall from the Persians, but few from the Greeks' side would fall. The Immortals would also be sent, but they too would find the challenge of the well-organized, well-drilled, and well-planned phalanx too difficult to overcome. Day 2 of the conflict would come, and little would change in the trajectory that the battle was going. Enter Ephialtes, a local who would approach the Persians with knowledge of a path. The Persians, now armed with an opportunity to unravel the Greeks and their insurmountable defense, would take it, and by the third day, they would use the path. The Persians would be able to bypass the Phocians that had been placed by Leonidas to guard the path, and Leonidas, gaining knowledge of this development, would call for a council of war. Some argued for retreat, but Leonidas had decided to stay, and others would stay with him. On the battlefield, he would order some forces to retreat. He and the Spartans that had come with him, along with others including some Thespians, Thebans and Helots, would guard the retreat of a greater force at great personal cost and peril to them, but with the fate of everyone they loved on the line. An ultimate demonstration of sacrifice, bravery and dedication. In the conflicts, Xerxes would lose 2 of his brothers, Abracomes and Hyperanthes. Whilst the pass was being held at Thermopylae by King Leonidas and the men that were with him, a second conflict, just as central and essential to the Greco-Persian wars, was occurring. This one at sea. It would occur near Evia. A storm would reduce the numbers of the ships the Persians had been able to amass, doing massive damage to the force that had been prepared for the invasion. The first loss to the Persian forces would happen off the coast of Magnesia. But the calamities at sea would not stop. A second group would be caught as they sailed around the coast of Evia. When the Allies found out about the fate of the ground forces at Thermopylae, they withdrew to Salamis. This occurred after days of conflict that would see losses on both sides. With the Allies retreating, Phocis, Boeotia and Attica would fall to the Persians, who would be able to enter into the walls of Athens. For their retreat, the Allies had chosen the island of Salamis. Some Athenians would have been evacuated from Athens to Salamis. The few that remained would offer resistance to the Persians, but would ultimately lose. At a point, in the course of events, Xerxes would call a war meeting. During it, certain individuals would warn him about the risks and disadvantages of attacking the Allies' position. Advice that he would ignore, to his undoing. Added to the information that was privy to Xerxes would be information that Themistocles would purposely add, or allow to filter due to a level of cunning and foresight. Some of it might have included stories of growing disunity between the Allies, issues concerning their next moves, and the location of their forces. Subterfuge and foresight would be Themistocles' weapon of choice, and the information that he was able to feed Xerxes would ultimately work its way into achieving his goals. Xerxes would dispatch his fleet. After the battle, a council of war would be held. Xerxes, perceiving the possibility that his army might find itself marooned in Europe if the Greeks had chosen to target Hellespont. The bulk of the army was withdrawn, leaving Mardonius with some of the troops to complete the effort at invasion. When they withdrew from Athens, the Athenians would be able to retake it, but at some point in the future they would lose Athens, once again to the Persians. But the Battle of Salamis had already gone some way into creating doubt in the Persians, and weakening their position. The battle would be remembered as an important point in the course of the wars, and an important part of history. After the battle, a stalemate would result, with neither side wanting to attack the other for a while. Mardonius would send an offer to the Athenians, which was rejected, the Athenians preferring freedom. With the offer refused, the Persians made their move, reoccupying Athens, and again sending an offer. The Athenians would look for assistance from Sparta, and Sparta would deploy a force. The episode that follows would further cement the fate of the Persians, and further strengthen the position that the Allies would now have. The Battle of Myky and the Battle of Plataea 479 BC. The Greek army would make an aggressive move to march out, causing the Persian army's retreat. Fortified camp would be made by the Persians on the bank of the Asopus River. But the Greeks would decide against further progress. The position they held was higher and to their advantage. The Persians would attempt several times to change this, and get the Greeks to cede this advantage. The Greeks would attempt to retreat to another location when their supply was interrupted, and their access to water was hampered. The Allies' retreat would be filled with chaos and mistakes. The Persians would follow them as they retreated. But some forces from the Allies would stand ground, and the battle would prove successful for the Greek allies. Mardonius would pass away in the battle. A few Persians would flee, then more and more joined until it was a general retreat. Storming the Persian camp would be a step taken by the Greeks. Being able to break through eventually, the Persians would have a lot of casualties. Few would be left to live. The victory here at Plataea would be massive. The Battle of Myky would see the Allies emerge triumphant as well. With the Persian ships in poor state, the Persians initially chose to remain out of the fray, choosing to put their ships to land, and protect them. But the Allies would attack, and win. Thus the Persian ships would be set to the flame. An important step towards further weakening the position of the Persians. The Persians would retreat, losing many men along the way. Some would fall to the enemies, some to sheer exhaustion. And furthermore to privation and hunger. A new era was born which would see a new tide set in, and the fate of the Greek world take a new direction. Back to the Peloponnesian War. 465 BC. The Helots, were people who were mostly involved with agricultural activity, whilst the Spartans occupied themselves with warfare and the preparation for it. They made a significant part of the population but was however mistreated, which created the conditions that were rife for a revolt. In addition to this, their numbers in relation to those of the Spartans varied at different points in history. When they revolted, Sparta would receive help from its allies who would send forces to help overcome the revolt. Athens, like Sparta's other allies, would send aid but would be rejected. The Spartans had a mistrust of Athens, a sign of a deteriorating relationship between the Spartans and the Athenians. Another sign would be when the Helots were overcome and left the state, they would be settled in Naupactos with Athenian aid. 459 BC. Megara and Corinth are engaged in a conflict. Megara was a city-state that had also involved itself in the fight against the Persians, fighting side by side with the Spartans and Athenians. It would be located within Attica. Megara and Corinth were both Sparta's allies. In the war, Athens sided on the side of Megara, and an alliance was made. The Megarans switched over from the Peloponnesian League and joined Athens in the Delian League. This conflict between the two states would come to be considered significant enough to be a contributor to the start of Peloponnesian War. 460 BC. Start of the First Peloponnesian War. Several causes could be attributed to the war, from growing Athenian influence, Megara's actions in changing its allegiance, and several other factors. Numerous battles would occur over the course of the wars, some of them involving fierce fighting. At stake in these conflicts was dominance in the region, and the events during the wars would be remembered in history. The year 460 BC would also see the Battle of Enoi. 457 BC would see a battle that ended in Spartan victory, the Battle of Tanagra. It saw the involvement of Myronides on the Athenian side and Nicomedes on the Spartan side. Myronides would be involved in the conflict between Corinth and Megara, and also in the Battle of Enophyta. Nicomedes, on the other hand, would occupy the role of regent for King Pleistouanax, who was his nephew. Nicomedes was also the son of Cleombrotus, a man who had acted as regent for the son of the great Leonidas, Pleistarchus. We will end the first part of this episode on the Peloponnesian Wars. In the next part, we'll explore other parts of the Peloponnesian Wars, the people involved, and look at events like the Battle of Enophyta, the Egyptian campaign, and the Battle of Sybota. We will also look at the importance of individuals like Brasidas. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and watch other videos on the channel.